preamble, we're starting Unit 2. We're going to continue to look at quadratics. So for a couple of days, we've got to hone our algebra skills to make sure we don't make silly boo-boos. So we're going to start by just doing a few examples of expanding and simplifying. So translation, English to math. When we say to expand, we're talking about multiplication. So for the first example that we have, I have 3x squared times a bracket 4xy minus 5xz. So that means 3x squared is multiplied by the first term and by the second term. So by everything that's in that bracket. Following, I like to draw my arrows. So my thought process is I have numbers, I have x's, and I have y's. And so for my multiplication, I'm going to deal with the numbers first. 3 times 4 is 12. And x squared times x, so we're calling on our rules of powers from last year. X to the 2 times x to the invisible 1 would be x to the 3. I don't have any y's in front, but I do have a y in the bracket, so I've got to make sure I write a y. My second term will be negative because I have positive 3x squared times negative 5xz. I do my numbers first, 15. X squared times x to the invisible 1 again. It's going to be x cubed. And then I have a z, and I have to write him again. I'm just going to put a little cross. There we go. Simplify means put things together that you can put together. So I look at my two terms and I say, am I adding or subtracting two of the very same thing? And I'm not. The first term is an x cubed y guy, and the second term is an x cubed z guy. They are not the same, so I cannot put them together. My answer is done just the way it is. Our second example is expand and simplify two binomials that I'm multiplying together. I can tell that it's multiplication because they're squished. When I am multiplying two binomials, when we worked on this last year, we had a little memory help that was FOIL. That helps us to remember that I'm multiplying four different things. I'm multiplying the x by 2x and minus 5. I'm also multiplying the 3 by 2x minus 5. So four multiplications are going to happen. FOIL is to help me to remember to do them all. So FOIL stands for firsts, outside, inside, last. My first terms would be the first in this bracket times the first in that bracket, which would give me x times 2x would be 2. Do my numbers first. X to the 1 times x to the 1 is x squared. So they're little invisible ones. The O stands for outside. That's the two terms that are as far away from each other as possible. So x times negative 5. X times negative 5 is negative 5x. The I in FOIL stands for inside. And it's the two terms on the inside of this little configuration, those two. So 3 times 2x would be 6, and I need that x as well. The L, you'll never guess, the L stands for last, and it's the last two in each bracket. So it's going to be 3 times the 5. So for my last, I have 3 times negative 5, negative 15. So we have a couple things we have to keep in mind. We have our rules for positives and negatives. We have to be careful about multiplying powers. So we have those types of rules to think about. And then we do our multiplication and we summarize where possible. I'm going to simplify. I have 2x squared, subtract 5x plus 6x, take away 15. The two terms in the middle are both terms with x. So I can put those together because they are the same name. 2x squared plus 1x subtract 15 is my final answer. We call that a trinomial because there's 3 terms. We're going to jump and do some horrible ones to see how good your memory is. The first one, I see brackets all over the place, so I know I'm going to do FOIL. So I'm just going to write that up there so I don't forget. I also see this funny little square right here, which to me can be kind of confusing. So I'm going to write that 3x plus 1 out twice. That's what a square means. I have 2 of this term being multiplied together, and then I have 2 different terms for later. Okay, so what I see is 2 cases of FOIL. The first one is 3x plus 1 times 3x plus 1. So FOIL would be firsts, 3x times 3x, 9x squared. Outside would be 3x times 1 plus 3x. Inside would be 1 times 3x. Oh, another 3x. And lasts would be 1 times 1 plus 1. Pause. Now I'm going to do the other 2. FOIL as well. I have x plus 2 times x plus 1. F for first would be x times x, x squared. Outside would be the x times the 1, which would be x. Inside would be the 2 and the x. They're close together. 2 times x is 2x. And my lasts would be 2 times 1. So I have expanded. Now I need to simplify. So I can put things together in piles that belong together. So first thing I see is that I have x squareds. I have 2 piles of x squareds. So altogether I have 9x squared and 1 more x squared. I have 10x squared. Secondly, I see that I have a bunch of x's. I have 3 here, 3 here, 1 here, 2 here. Altogether, I have 6, 7, 8, 9 x's. And lastly, I have a number and another number. So I can put those together and get 3. 10x squared plus 9x plus 3, also a trinomial because it has 3 different terms. Second example, I've got another same idea where I have x minus 2 times 4x plus 3, and I have 3x minus 2 with a funny little square sign. It's always best to write it out twice. 3x minus 2 squared means 3x minus 2 times 3x minus 2. Okay, x minus 2 times 4x plus 3. Subtract, that's important. Okay, for the first one, I'm going to do FOIL. Firsts would be x times 4x. I get 4. X times x is x squared. My outside would be x times 3. I get plus 3x. Inside would be negative 2 times 4x, negative 8x. And lasts would be the negative 2 times positive 3, negative 6. So that's the first 2 multiplied together. I'm going to put them in brackets. And then I'm going to subtract whatever answer I get for the second 2. 3x minus 2 times 3x minus 2. So I have my firsts, 3x times 3x, 9x squared. Outside would be 3x times negative 2, negative 6x. Inside would be negative 2 times 3x, happens to also be negative 6x. And lasts would be negative 2 times negative 2, which is positive 4. The reason I put this in brackets is the first pile doesn't matter so much, but the second pile is subtract everything that comes after. So I'm going to be subtracting all of this from the second multiplication. So let's write it all out with the correct signs, and then we'll collect like terms. So the first multiplication that I did is 4x squared plus 3x, subtract 8x, subtract 6. And then I'm supposed to subtract all of the terms that come after. So subtract 9x squared. Subtract negative 6x is the same as add 6x. Subtract negative 6x is add 6x, and subtract 4. Sorry, didn't quite fit. Now that I'm careful with my signs, I can collect like terms. I have x squareds. I have 4 of them and negative 9 of them. So altogether, I have negative 5x squared. I see a lot of x's. 3 of them, negative 8 of them, 6 of them, 6 of them. So I have 7 altogether. 7x. And lastly, I have some numbers. I have negative 6 and a negative 4. And if I put those together, I have negative 10. One last slide is something that you did last year as well, called factoring. That's when we go in the opposite direction. So I have the answer, and I'm asked to write it as a multiplication. So the answers that we get on this slide should look like the questions that we had on the last one. So for the first one we have here, I have 4x squared minus 6x, and I've been asked to factor it, which means I want to write something times something. So I want to write a factor out the front, both a number and a letter, that goes into both of these terms. So my thinking is separate the numbers and the letters. What number goes into 4 and into 6? That would be the number 2. What letter goes into x squared and into x? That would be x. So 2x would divide nicely into both 4x squared and 6x. That is my greatest common factor. My second thought is, what do I have to multiply 2x by to get 4x squared? Well, I need to multiply 2 by something to get 4. So I need a 2. I need to multiply the x part by something to get x squared. Well, I need another x. There. For my second term, I need to think about what am I going to multiply 2x by to get negative 6x. I need a negative, and I need a 3. I don't need any more x's. I'm good to go, and that is finished. I have my greatest common factor here. We'll write that out in a second. And I have what you multiply it by to get what you started with. For the second example, I have 3 terms, 3a squared minus 15a minus 9, a trinomial. And I'm going to look for a greatest common factor for all 3 terms. And I personally think separately, my letters and my numbers. So what number goes into 3, 15, and 9? Only 3. I have to consider whether I have a variable a in all 3 terms or not. I do not, so I can't have an a as part of my greatest common factor. So I have the greatest common factor. I need to write in the brackets what I multiply 3 by to get each term. For the first term, 3 times what gives me 3a squared? Well, I already have the 3, so I need a squared. For the second term, 3 times what gives me negative 15a? I need a negative, I need a 5, and I need an a. Quick mental check. Is 3 times negative 5a equal to negative 15a? Yes, it is. And last, 3 times what gives me negative 9? I need a negative and a 3. No a's required. I am done. I have found my greatest common factor and factored it out. 10b to the 4 minus 20b squared. I need a greatest common factor that includes both constants and variables that go into both terms. My thinking would be start with the numbers, What divides into 10 and into 20 as big as possible? It'll be a 10. Then I look at my variables. What goes into b to the 4 and b squared as big as possible? B squared would go into both b squared and b to the 4th. So I have my greatest common factor. And I throw up a set of brackets, and I determine what do I multiply that by to get each of the terms that I started with. I love my arrows. 10b squared times what gives me that first term? Well, I already have a 10. So I could write 1 in the brackets because 10 times 1 is 10, but I'm not going to bother. B squared times what gives me b to the 4? B squared. So we need to be good with our rules of powers to remember that. Second term, what do I multiply 10b squared by to get negative 20b squared? I need a negative. I'm going to think about my 10 first of all. I need to multiply it by 2 to get 20. I already have b squared, so I don't want any more b's. I'm done. Last one. This one's a weird one. I got a mess. Do you know what I see? That I have two things here, and I want a greatest common factor for those two things. And I see that both of them have a greatest common factor of x plus 1. Both of them have this thing that's the same, and I can write that as the greatest common factor. X plus 1 for my first term, I'm missing the 3x part. What do I multiply the x plus 1 by to get the second term? I'm missing the negative 2, and I'm done. That one's a little bit strange, but it would be very helpful for some factoring that we're going to do later. So let's practice.